Salutations, every pup, and welcome to Chapter 39 of The One They Call Broccoli by Texiliaz. As always, the link to the fic will be in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's jump on into it. Chapter 39, Summer Camp with Broccoli. Chapter Summary. Broccoli goes to summer camp. Author's notes. Hello, everyone. Just as the title says, it's finally time for summer camp and fun times. Absolutely nothing goes wrong. Izuku's point of view. It was finally time for 1A's summer camp. They were all very excited about it. Even Toshinori had been excited, even though he wasn't even joining them on the trip. Shota was the least excited, since he'd have to be the one actually keeping an eye on all of them. And while Izuku was excited too, he was admittedly also a little bit nervous, especially surrounding his time limit. And he wasn't the only one. Ida, Todoroki, and even Bakugo had cornered him about it, asking how he was going to hide his cat form throughout the trip. And, well, the short answer was, he wouldn't. He had a plan to keep his identity safe, but it didn't involve hiding. He just hoped the things he'd gotten would actually work, and he'd be able to pull it off. It also helped that Ida, Todoroki, and even Kota had all agreed to cover for him. Bakugo had simply scoffed at the idea, so Izuku wasn't sure if he could really count on him or not. They all got on the bus, excited chatter filling the air around them. Daigoro had tried hanging out in the aisle of the bus, but that had proven to be impossible, since once they started moving, he would just lag behind the vehicle. So he instead settled back into the mindscape with an audible pout. It was once they reached their first stop, however, that things took a weird turn. Shota told them all to get out, which they did, thinking they'd be able to just stretch their legs before the bus would take them back to the camp. But then, two of the Pussycats had shown up, and Izuku had been so excited to see the heroes. Ever since he developed his cat quirk, he'd been a huge fan of the cat-themed rescue team. He'd even daydreamed while he was younger about joining them and helping them with his quirk, maybe even becoming a fifth member. But as they say, never meet your heroes. The next thing Izuku knew, danger sense sparked to life, and he barely had any time to react before the ground shifted beneath them, and they were flung off the side of a cliff? Seriously, who does that? Sure, they'd softened the ground beneath them with their quirks so they wouldn't straight up die, but that nearly gave him a heart attack. Then monsters appeared, and Izuku was just done with this whole trip already. Apparently, they were made of dirt and controlled by Pixie Bob, and they were supposed to fight them off while getting to the camp. It was not a fun experience. Once they finally reached the camp, it was to find Shota, the traitor, and the Pussycats waiting for them, as well as some small child. There you are! Congratulations on making it back alive! Pixie Bob told them cheerfully, before turning to Izuku and his group and grinning widely. Especially some of you. I can't believe how strong you are, and so handsome too. She then crowded Izuku and some of the other boys, making all of them extremely uncomfortable. Pixie Bob, what the hell do you think you're doing? Shota barked, before stomping over to stand between them like a protective shield. Sorry about that, Eraserhead. She's at that age where she's looking for a mate, Mandalay said apologetically as she pulled Pixie Bob away from them. These kids are underage, Shota pointed out with a growl. Also, they are my students, and if you make them uncomfortable again, we will leave. Right, sorry about that. Got a bit too excited there, Pixie Bob apologized, though she didn't sound very sincere. Izuku hadn't even noticed he'd been trembling until someone laid a hand on his shoulder. Startled, he looked up to find Shota giving him a concerned look. You okay, kid? The man asked, voice uncharacteristically gentle. Yeah, I'm fine, Izuku answered shakingly. He had never been good with being crowded, but that had been especially uncomfortable. Shaking off his discomfort, Izuku's attention was once again directed to the kid, who was scoffing and glaring at all of them like they were the scum of the earth. By the way, who is that kid over there? Izuku asked, pointing towards the child who was still glaring daggers at them. even more so now that their attention was on him. "Oh, this is my nephew, Kota. Please be nice to him, as he can be a bit shy," Mandalay said, giving the kid a complicated look between worried and sad. Izuku smiled and stepped forward before leaning down and reaching out his hand. "Hello, Kota. It's nice to meet you." Danger Sense suddenly sparked to life, and Izuku had just enough time to leap back before Kota's fist collided. Had the kid seriously tried to punch him in the balls? "Kota!" Mandalay scolded, sounding horrified. "You need to be nice." "Why would I ever want to play nice with a bunch of stupid heroes?" The kid spat back before running off. Behind him, Izuku could hear Kachan scoff almost fondly, as if he was amused by the kid's antics. Izuku, on the other hand, failed to see the humor in what just happened. Besides that horrid interaction, the rest of their evening was pretty good. They'd been a bit pissed once they realized that 1B had not been put through the same torture as them, and had instead been driven the whole way. When they asked Shota about it, the man just shrugged and said they each got to choose how to teach their own class. And Izuku desperately wanted to yell at him for choosing throwing kids off a cliff and into a forest full of monsters as a great way to teach. Because it really, really wasn't. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just glared really hard at him. Then came time for the bats. And to his credit, Izuku tried to get in and join his classmates. He even got changed and everything. But as soon as he stood there, but as he stood there at the ledge of the outdoor bath, towel wrapped around his waist, he just couldn't find it in himself to step in. He'd never had anything against water before, back when he was a kid, but ever since his quirk manifested, Izuku had grown less and less fond of it, until he just stopped taking baths and showers altogether, since grooming himself in his cat form seemed to be more than enough to keep both his forms clean. But it wasn't like he could explain that to his classmates, could he? "Come on, Mido bro, what's the holdup?" Kirishima called out, once noticed he was the last one to get in. I think I actually just gonna go to bed," Izuku said awkwardly, cringing as some water splashed over the edge and got a bit too close for comfort. "Without bathing? Dude, that's gross," Sero said with a grimace. "Don't worry, I'm just gonna use one of the showers. I just really don't feel like bathing right now." Izuku tried to excuse himself, already turning to leave. "Aw, come on, man! The water feels great!" Kaminari laughed before splashing some water towards Izuku. Multiple things then happened at once. A few droplets landed on Izuku's feet, and the boy just leaped back in the air with an audible hiss. If he had fur, he was sure it would be standing on edge. Everyone around them paused, looking at him like he was crazy. Unable to take the stairs and feeling extremely embarrassed, Izuku let out a quick sorry before rushing out of there to get changed. "What the fuck was that?" Daigoro laughed, while Izuku hurried to get dressed. "Dude, kiddo, you acted like an actual cat back there." "I know. Fuck, shit. That was so embarrassing," Izuku swore as he finished putting on his clothes and rushed out of the dressing room. "Now everyone is gonna think I'm weird." "Midoriya, why aren't you in the bath?" "Oh, for the love of... I saw Sensei. Hello. Nice evening we're having," Izuku answered, turning around to face a man with what he hoped didn't look like too much of a forced smile. "Yeah," Shota agreed reluctantly, watching him with squinted eyes. "What's wrong this time, problem child? Don't like water?" he asked, sounding done with this whole interaction already. I, no, actually, I don't." Izuku found himself telling the truth. "I just took a quick shower and was gonna head to bed early." The man hummed, looking him up and down. "Without washing your hair?" he asked, reaching forward to ruffle Izuku's very much dry hair. I didn't want to catch a cold," Izuku said meekly, knowing it was a weak excuse and hoping that the man wouldn't fight him on this. Thankfully, his teacher seemed to grant him mercy, as he simply withdrew his hand with a shrug. "Fair enough. Sleep well, kiddo. You're gonna need the energy for tomorrow." And with that, the man walked away, and Izuku let out a deep sigh of relief. He entered the boy's room and found his claimed futon where he put all his stuff. He picked the futon in the furthest corner of the room, with Ida and then Todoroki closest to him. He then pulled out the things he'd gotten and got started on setting it up. Hopefully, this would be able to trick Shota and his classmates into leaving him alone through the nights. Once all of that was done, it became time for the next part of the plan, which was to somehow make his presence as broccoli known to Shota in a way that made him think he'd been on the bus the whole time. His original plan had been to hide in the man's bag until he opened it and saw him. But all of his plans flew out the window when he entered the hallway and saw a very sad-looking Kota sitting by himself out on the porch out on the porch of the building. Now, granted, Broccoli could just ignore him. After all, this was the same kid that had tried to punch him in the balls earlier. But he just looked so lonely and sad that Broccoli hesitated to leave. That hesitation was what became his doom, because Kota noticed him. The kid had obviously been crying, but as soon as he noticed the cat, red-rimmed eyes widened and a small smile appeared on his face. "Hello, you," Kota said, much gentler than Broccoli had ever heard him speak before. "Where did you come from?" he asked, reaching out a hand to coax Broccoli to come closer. After another moment of hesitation, Broccoli gave in and he slowly walked over to the kid, sniffing his hand before giving it a firm stroke. The kid lit up at that and immediately started petting him. He was surprisingly gentle, clearly used to cats with the way he was petting all the right spots. Kota continued to talk and pet him, while Broccoli laid down by his side and just enjoyed the petting for now. He knew he had to show himself to Shota, so he would know he was there and okay, or else Toshinori might go crazy once he realizes he's not coming home, which would in turn freak Shota out once he heard of it. But it was just so nice to lay there that he soon lost track of time. Shota's point of view. "No, Toshi, I'm sure the cat brat is fine. He always does this, remember?" Shota tried to calm his frantic husband down. Toshinori had called him soon after he'd said goodbye to Midoriya, stressed out beyond words because Broccoli hadn't come home yet again. "I know, but what if something happened? Or what if he accidentally got on the bus with one of the other students and is now lost somewhere, or locked inside a bus garage?" "I'm sure he's fine," Shota repeated as he walked down the porch of the building. "And even if he somehow..." He then cut himself off when he spotted Kota, as well as something green laying next to the kid. "Sho?" "I found him," Shota sighed. "You did? Where is he?" "He's right here, at camp. I'll call you back later," Shota answered before hanging up the phone. With another sigh, Shota walked over to the two seated at the edge of the porch and sat down next to them. "Hello. I see you've made a new friend." Immediately, the kid tensed up and he glared at him with untrusty eyes. Broccoli, however, just meowed and responsible for stretching with a big yawn. "Any reason you followed us all the way to the middle of nowhere?" Shota asked the cat. Kota said, obviously confused. "Sorry, I was asking Broccoli. That's my cat," Shota explained, gesturing towards the little bastard that had the audacity to lay back down with another yawn, as if he hadn't just caused panic for him and his husband. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know," Kota said quietly, looking hesitant as he stopped petting the cat. "It's fine," Shota told him earnestly, offering a small smile. "I'm glad you two are getting along. He's usually not very friendly." "Kota, what are you doing out here? You should be in bed." Mandalay suddenly entered the porch, looking concerned. "He's just saying hello to my cat," Shota explained calmly, hand gesturing to the purring cat that was nudging Kota's hand and asking for more pets. "You brought a cat here?" Mandalay asked, sounding both excited and judgmental at the same time. "Apparently," Shota answered with a shrug. "Definitely not by choice. He must have snuck into one of the kids' bags or something." Broccoli, the little bastard, just meowed innocently at them, causing Mandalay to coo at how adorable he was. Can he stay in my room? Kota asked, sounding hopeful. Um, well, Mandalay said, looking at Shota for guidance. Maybe another night, kiddo. Right now, I should probably have a talk with him. A talk? With the cat? Kota asked, grimacing at the idea. Yes, he has a quirk that lets him understand us, which is why I need to set down some ground rules if he's gonna stay here, Shota explained. Fine, Kota said reluctantly, before standing up. Good night, Broccoli, the boy called out, completely ignoring Shota and Mandalay as he headed towards his room. Once Shota was sure the kid was out of earshot, he turned towards Mandalay. That kid. He's the water duo's son, isn't he? Beside him, Broccoli's ears perked up at the name of the late hero duo. Yeah, it was so awful what happened to them. Ever since his parents died, he just haven't been able to see heroes the same way again. It's like he looks at us and he already imagines all the way we could die. I see. That must be hard, Shota offered softly. It is. We're trying to be there for him, but, well, I'm not sure how much good we are actually doing for him. Mandalay sighed, before sitting down and giving Broccoli a scritch behind the ears. The cat seemed to have sensed her sadness, since he crawled closer to the hero. You're there for him, Shota said slowly, glancing towards the direction the kid had disappeared to, and then back down at Broccoli. That's more than most can ask for. Just give him some time. I guess, Mandalay sighed again, still petting the now purring cat. Shota and her sat in silence for a while, simply watching the stars, before Mandalay stood up and to also go to sleep. After saying goodnight to Mandalay, Shota scooped up Broccoli into his arms. The cat had listened while they talked, glancing worriedly between them and Kota's door the whole time. He wondered how much of that Broccoli could understand, if he knew what death was or what it meant to be an orphan. Though he suspected the kitten would have to, at some level, considering his parents had been nowhere to be found. After some debating, he took Broccoli back to his and Vlad's room, but not before checking in on his brats. The boys and girls were separated, and both rooms were dark and quiet. Just to be safe, Shota peeked into the boys' room and scanned over his students. He felt a bit silly, but he just couldn't fully believe that Broccoli had managed to get here all by himself by mistake. Not to mention the repeated coincidences, both in his appearance and Izuku's disappearance. It all created a picture he didn't quite like. So, with Broccoli safely in his arms, he looked around until he finally spotted a head of green hair. He walked closer, as close as he could with Ida and Todoroki blocking his way. Sure enough, his problem child was tucked beneath the covers, back facing him with only his green, unruly curls sticking out. He could also hear faint snoring coming from the corner, meaning he was fast asleep. Shota shook his head with a sigh and hurried out of the room. That had been stupid of him. Of course they weren't the same. He had his little Broccoli right here, and Midoriya sleeping soundly in that room to prove it. With that out of the way, and feeling incredibly stupid, Shota headed over to the teacher's room. Vlad was already there and going through his class's individual training for tomorrow. And as soon as he saw Shota, or rather Broccoli, the man's face twisted into an ugly grimace. Oh, right. Vlad is a dog person. What is that? Vlad asked, sneering at Broccoli as if he carried some sort of disease. It's my cat, Shota answered with a roll of his eyes. Broccoli, this is 1B's homeroom teacher, Vlad King. Vlad, this is Broccoli. He has... You talk to your cat? Vlad barked out a laugh. Shota's eyes twitched at having been interrogated as he sat down across from his coworker. Broccoli settled on the table, glaring at Vlad, who was still laughing at him. The man then tried to reach out for him, only for Broccoli to leap across the table and scratch the man right across the face, leaving bright red marks before gracefully landing on all fours with a huff. As I was trying to say, Broccoli has a quirk. Think of him as a mini Nezu, and try not to piss him off, he said, enjoying the way the colors drained from the man's face. You couldn't have started with that? The man barked angrily. You couldn't have let me finish? Shota shot back, before ignoring the other and instead focusing down on his own plans for tomorrow. Meanwhile, Broccoli settled down on Shota's futon, and soon the room was filled with the sounds of a purring cat, much to Shota's delight and Vlad's annoyance. Izuku's point of view. The next morning, after having woken up to his still sleeping dad, Broccoli hurried back to the boys' room. Thankfully, everyone except Ida was still asleep, and together they hid the wig and pillow, turned off the speaker playing snoring sounds, and Izuku then changed back into his human form beneath the covers. Wouldn't it be easier to just tell everyone the truth? Ida asked him quietly. Probably, Izuku answered with a shrug. But where's the fun in that, right? He tried to joke, only to be met with a frown. Anyway, thanks for helping me out, Izuku added awkwardly. Of course! What are friends for? Ida answered almost automatically. During breakfast, things got a bit stressful for Izuku. The reason? Well, their teachers walked into the room, and one of them had a clear scratch marks across his face. The other students asked Vlad what happened, but Shota was the one who answered for him. Broccoli scratched him. He answered with a way too amused smirk. Wait, Broccoli is here? Ashido squealed excitedly, already looking beneath the tables to try and find him. Yes, he must have slipped into the bus when no one was looking. He was gone when I woke up this morning, though, so if anyone sees him, let me know. Who's Broccoli? One of the 1B students, Kendo, asked, at which Yaomomo explained to her that Broccoli was Aizawa-sensei's cat and that he had a quirk. Immediately, the conversation once again turned to him, but Izuku was too busy to notice, mainly because Ida was glaring at him. You attacked a teacher? The blue-haired boy hissed quietly, chopping his arms. It was self-defense, Izuku squeaked out just as quietly. He could feel his face practically burning at this point. Did he hurt you? Todoroki asked, anger clear in his eyes. No, Izuku was quick to defend Vlad. He was just very rude to Aizawa-sensei, he muttered, embarrassed. Meanwhile, a few tables away, Jiro and Shoji were giving them questioning looks. The training camp was brutal. That was all he could describe it as. They all got assigned different things to do. Izuku was a bit of a special case, since his quirk had so many different aspects of it. He hadn't really used Float or Black Whip much in class, since they sort of just happened, and Danger Sense was always just there whenever he needed it, and wasn't really something he could train. But apparently, Shota thought otherwise, since he'd handed him his training plan, which included all of his quirks. Not only would he do strength training with Tiger, he would also train the amount of percent he could put into his full cowl, train Black Whip with how far he could stretch it, as well as training Float together with Uraraka. The worst part of the training, though, was the random rocks thrown at him by Shota, meant to activate Danger Sense, but mostly just giving him a headache. Izuku swore the man was enjoying that part of the training way too much. Once they were done with training, all the students were supposed to cook their own dinner. Luckily, his classmates were used to him going to bed early and didn't question him too much when Izuku tried to go to bed early. Shota, on the other hand... Where do you think you're going? Their teacher demanded, arms crossed as he blocked Izuku's path. To bed? Izuku answered uncertainly, wondering why the man looked so pissed off. Not before eating, you're not. The man huffed before motioning to where the class was preparing for dinner. Izuku very much wanted to tell the man he would eat dinner, just not human food. The Pussycats luckily had a whole storage worth of cat food, which they used to feed strays and had lent to Shota to feed Broccoli while he was here. But as much as Izuku wanted to explain that, he couldn't exactly say it. Not without blowing his whole cover. It's okay, Sensei. Todoroki called out from where he was lighting the fire. Midoriya always goes to bed without dinner. It's fine. That had Shota glare at Izuku, and the boy immediately cringed back. He was sure the other teen had wanted to help, but that really didn't. I see, the man said slowly, still glaring disapprovingly at Izuku. We'll talk about that later. For now, go make dinner with your classmates. But Izuku tried to argue. That's an order, the man bit out, while motioning Izuku back to the rest of the class. Yes, sensei, he agreed reluctantly, ducking his head with a defeated pout. His quirk was tearing at him from the inside, and he winced at the thought of having to work through another hour or so before he could change forms. But even so, he didn't have much choice other than to grit through it. He figured he'd help out with the food, then eat something real quick, before heading back to their room to change. Besides, how long could making dinner take away? How long could making dinner take anyway? Especially when they were all working together, right? If only the vestiges would stop messing around! It moved again! Kaminari cried out in frustration as he looked over for the pot that had magically disappeared for what must have been the 5th time. Izuku glared at Daigoro, who was snickering next to the pot that had somehow been moved to the top of the roof. It's up there, Izuku pointed out, causing all of his classmates to stare up in exasperation at the pot. How? Kaminari screeched. Hold on, I've got it, Edadaka said, before floating herself up to grab it. She looked pale afterwards, clearly on the verge of throwing up from overusing her quirk. Izuku shot her a worried, yet grateful smile. He wasn't sure he'd be able to use his own float right now, considering how annoyed he felt with everything. I swear, guys, the ghosts followed us here, Sarah laughed nervously. Dude, don't say that! What if calling attention to them makes them angry? Kaminari hissed, just as a glass fell over right next to him, causing him to shriek and Nana to laugh maniacally, looking way too pleased with herself. Ghosts? One of the 1B students asked, glancing between all of 1A in confusion. Ghosts aren't real. Yeah, they are! Ashida shot back. I swear, our dorms are haunted! Weren't the dorms built like a month ago? How could they be haunted? Monoma scoffed, rolling his eyes at all of them. I keep telling you all, Shinso sighed as he cut the vegetables. It's not the dorms that are haunted, it's a person. And how can you be so sure of that? Kaminari asked frantically. Unless... Shinso, are you being haunted? Me? Nah, we're all just victims of the ghost haunting someone among us. Shinso snickered, giving them all a terrifying grin. Dude, you can't keep saying stuff like that! I'm freaking out over here! Just saying as it is, Shinso said with a shrug, as he continued to cut vegetables almost nonchalantly. Izuku turned all of them out, instead turning his focus to making sure none of the other stuff went missing and quietly scolding the vestiges for causing a scene again. Once the food was done, the subject of ghosts had thankfully been dropped. Izuku practically inhaled his food before standing up to put his dishes away. He ignored Shota's questioning look as he bid his classmates goodnight before he hurried to his room to change. As soon as he set up the pillows and wig so it looked vaguely human-shaped, he changed into Broccoli with a relieved sigh. Almost as soon as he settled back into his cat form, all the pain and irritation he'd felt from before melted away and he felt a lot better. He waited another long moment before making his appearance, not wanting to show up too soon after Izuku had disappeared, or else it might look suspicious. Just to be sure, Broccoli took a long detour around the building and made sure that when he eventually arrived back at the campsite, it was from the direction of the forest, making it look like that's where he'd been all day. Shota was the first one to spot him, and as soon as he did, his shoulders slumped and what Broccoli could only guess was relief. Hello, Broccoli. Nice of you to finally show up, the man called out, causing some of the students to also look over at them. Is that the cat that scratched Vlad-sensei? One of the 1B students asked, curiously. Yup, that's little Broccoli. Isn't he the cutest? Hagakure cooed in response, making Broccoli roll his eyes with a huff as he made his way over to his dad. Hey, Broccoli, do you want some? Kaminari suddenly asked, having gotten out of his seat to instead kneel next to him with a piece of meat dangling from his hand. Kaminari, we are not supposed to feed Sensei's cats, remember? Ida told him sternly. Oh, come on, that rule is only for Slushy, Kaminari whined. And what if this makes him like me? It's not fair how he's only buddy-buddy with you guys. I want some broccoli love too. That had the class and the vestiges laugh, and even Broccoli let out a snort of amusement, if only at how dumb the whole thing sounded. Still, the meat did smell delicious, and Broccoli was hungry, despite Izuku having eaten a little just before. With big, pleading eyes, Broccoli turned around to look up at his dad. The man stared back for a moment before giving in with a sigh. Go ahead, Kaminari, Shota said, sounding defeated, before adding more sternly. But just one. Yes! Kaminari cheered, the loud noise making Broccoli's ears fall back on his head. Whoops! I mean, yay! The blonde added in a much lower whisper. By now, most of the students were watching them curiously, and Broccoli suddenly felt both incredibly stupid and embarrassed. Had he seriously agreed to be hand-fed by one of his classmates? Wait a minute, Kaminari suddenly said, looking deep in thought as he pulled the meat away and out of Broccoli's reach. Does he know any tricks? Like sit, play dead, roll over? He started counting, looking at Broccoli with an excited grin. Broccoli bristled at that. This was already embarrassing enough as it was. He wasn't going to do any tricks like some kind of circus animal. With a glare, Broccoli raised a paw and held it out for the boy, who immediately lit up. Oh, you want a handshake? You're so smart! The blonde gushed, reaching out with his hand to take his paw. Kaminari, I wouldn't do that. Should have tried to warn him, but it was too late. With the teen's guard down, Broccoli used his outstretched hand as a platform before leaping up into the air and taking the piece of meat from his unsuspected hand. The boy yelped in surprise, but Broccoli paid him no mind as he landed gracefully on all fours, before strutting over to Shota to eat his prize in peace. Never mind, Shota chuckled. All around them, the students, and Vestiges, were laughing loudly, all while Kaminari stared at him in both shock and disappointment. Oh man, the boy whined. Didn't even get to pet him. Broccoli rolled his eyes at that, giving the teen a smug look as he took another bite. No way was he going to make it that easy. Later, after he'd finished eating, Broccoli saw Kota sneaking away from the campsite. Concerned for the child, Broccoli followed him in silence. He considered letting his presence be known, but decided against it for now. Instead, he followed quietly as they walked through the forest and up the mountain. Where they ended up wasn't anything like he had been expecting. They were high up on the mountain, by this point, on a cliffside that overlooked the forest surrounding the campsite. He wasn't sure he approved of the kids spending time alone up here, but at the same time, the view looked amazing, so Broccoli could definitely see the appeal. When the kid didn't do anything, just sitting at the cliffside and watching the stars, a sad and lonely expression on his young face, Broccoli just finally decided that he couldn't take it anymore, and he stepped out of the shadows with a small meow, alerting the others of his presence. Despite having tried to be gentle, the kid still startled badly, and Broccoli's stomach churned with worry at how close he was to the edge. Wasn't there a safer place for the kid to hang out? Did any of the adults even know about him being out here? Oh, hey, Broccoli, Kota said quietly, motioning for him to get closer, which Broccoli hesitantly did. Oh, hey, Broccoli, Kota said quietly, motioning for him to get closer, which Broccoli hesitantly did. He let the kid scoop him up and laid down in his lap, where he accepted pets as they watched the stars in silence. Broccoli wasn't sure how long they stayed up there, but Kota eventually picked him up and headed back to the camp. After they got back, and after the adults had all fussed over Kota for disappearing in the middle of the night, Shota surprisingly let him stay in Kota's room, both because the kid begged him to let him stay, and because Vlad had banned him from their room after what had happened last night. Before they'd left for Kota's room, though, Shota picked up Broccoli and gave him a small hug. Look after the kid for us, all right? The man whispered gently, before handing Broccoli back to a confused-looking Kota. He wasn't sure what Shota meant with that. Of course he was going to look after the kid. Did he think he wasn't? No matter. Broccoli had no intention of leaving this obviously grieving kid alone. No. As long as they were here, he'd try to be a good friend and protect him from whatever it was that was haunting him. After laying down, Kota stayed awake for a while, talking with Broccoli about everything and nothing, before he eventually fell asleep with the cat in his arms. Broccoli was then quick to follow, feeling exhausted after the day. They were both sleeping peacefully on the kid's futon, Broccoli curled up protectively on top of the small child's chest. Neither of them was awake to see it, but outside the room, Shota and Mandalay were both watching them with fond smiles. The next day was much like the last, with brutal training during the day and an exhausted Broccoli during the night. What was different, though, was the fact that they would be holding a test of courage between the classes. Thankfully, it wasn't mandatory, and no one questioned him when he went to bed early, not even Shota. But still, even if it wasn't mandatory, Izuku still felt sad he couldn't participate, due to his time limit. He mourned all the fun things he couldn't do because of his stupid quirk and its limitations. With nothing else to do, Broccoli had followed Kota to the boys' secret hideout, and they were once again hanging out on the cliff together, watching the stars in peaceful silence. But then, Broccoli started smelling smoke. Then, the flames became visible. And then, everything just went horribly wrong. Author's notes. Dun dun dun! Sorry, not sorry, for the cliffhanger. I couldn't help but cut it there. We're nearing the biggest climax of this fic. I'm gonna try and not rewrite too much of what happens in canon and instead focus on new stuff. So I really hope you will enjoy the next chapter and what is to come. Also, on a lighter note, poor Kaminari, lol. It's not easy getting a cat to love you. Anyway, as always, thank you everyone for all your continued patience, comments, and support. Hope you all have a wonderful day or night wherever you are in the world. Next up, Broccoli versus Muscular. And that's a wrap on chapter 39. Oh my god, we're nearing the end of this fic. There's less than 10 chapters left to what the author has updated, and then from there it'll be I'll read chapters as the author updates. So, are y'all excited for that? You got let's see, 8 more days out of me? There's 48 chapters. The last chapter is an author's note. So that is 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47. That is 8 chapters. Yeah. You have 8 chapters left for me. So 8 more days before we will be reading as the author updates. So isn't that exciting? Anyway, please go show the original author Texiliaz some love, and please leave me a comment. I love reading your comments. They make me so happy. Please leave me specifically hate comments, and I'll leave you a shout out. Speaking of, we have some hate commenters that we need to shout out. So, shout outs to Oaken Shadow 6763, EMS Simps 8881, Kim is a person 6167, and FaeAreCryptidsToo. By the way, I say yes. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, pups.